We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Oh God, I'm so hungry.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, this is another episode of Archeo Animals. As always, I'm Alex Fitzpatrick, and with me is
Simona Falanga. Still clinging on.
Aren't we all? And today we are doing one of our fun general topic type episodes where we won't be talking about specific species. Instead, we'll be talking about hunting.
And lots of different species.
Well, yeah, definitely. Which I actually kind of enjoy doing more. Sometimes it's very stressful to talk about one species for like a whole podcast.
And it's a nice break from all of the domesticates, which, as much as I like, it tends to be a lot of what you find in the archaeological record. So some wild mammal was like, woohoo! It spices it up a little.
Fair. No, very fair. Just to start off, though, like, have you ever done a hunt? Have you ever done a big hunting? I don't know.
No.
No, neither have I. I mean, not to get too political, but like I also don't have many feelings about hunting in general.
But people sure did do a lot of hunting in antiquity, and they still do.
And to be fair, thank God for that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have as much material as we do.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, probably the best way to like start this conversation is to kind of take a few steps back first and just kind of talk about that when we're talking about hunting, we're specifically talking about like wild game. For folks who have been listening for a while, you probably remember we did an episode on domesticated animals and farms and things like that. So wild animals are kind of in this dichotomy of domestic and wild animals. So just as a refresher, Simona, do you want to give them an explanation of what domestic animals are?
Like I said, a domesticated animal will be an animal that over a long period of time has been subject to deliberate selective breeding. Thus, like, what you get as a result is both morphological and behavioural traits which are very different from its wild ancestor. Yeah. So to boil it down, you make it like you and not try to kill you. Well, and sometimes, like bring some cosmetic changes to the animal or make sure that he adapts to a particular purpose. An easy example would be like that of sheep, because the wild ancestor of sheep actually didn't have wool, but hair. Mm-hmm. And then slowly through selective breeding, you get your nice woolly coat. But then again, they would just normally shed it. And you get that in some of the modern breeds, like some of the heritage breeds like the Soe, where you don't shear them, they just randomly drop bits of wool and you sort of have to pick them up as you go along. But we've brought that selective breeding one step further in a way that we wanted to have that control over when the wool was harvested. So, harvested for lack of a better term. So now a lot of the modern sheep breeds will have to be shorn usually yearly. Yeah. So that's, what we've done to animals.
Yeah, so we basically created like a dependence, which goes both ways, to be fair. We depend on domesticated animals for a lot of our sustenance and a lot of our materials, and they depend on us to, make sure they don't die, which I guess is a fair trade, maybe.
Well, you keep them safe from predator. I mean, an awful lot of them do end up getting eaten, so
yeah,
I'm not sure who's getting the better deal out of that.
Yeah, I guess so. But like you said, domesticated animals often have morphological differences between them and their wild comparisons, I guess. So when it comes to wild animals and domesticated animals, especially with the bones, we can actually see that there are differences between the two, especially between pretty closely related species. So, you know, looking at deer bones and comparing them with something like sheep or cattle, or even like dog breeds and foxes. So a lot of times we can use like those kind of differences in element to differentiate assemblages.
Well, I guess in terms of how to differentiate a domestic from a wild, I mean, it depends sort of what we mean by wild animals. Of course, yeah, well, wild animal. But do we mean sort of the wild ancestor or sort of the wild version, if you will, of a domesticated species, or just a species that has never been domesticated, see red deer?
Yeah.
Because it gets, I mean, you have a few generic pointers, say, I don't know, between pig and wild boar or cattle and aurochs. Of course, there'll be a size difference, because you'll find that usually when animals are domesticated, they tend to get smaller. But then, you know, certain species like cattle will then just get much, much bigger again after the Industrial Revolution. Then you have some that are a little bit trickier in a way, because then you have like, say dogs, they come in such a wide range of breeds and shapes and sizes, and they do like even more so now, but they would have done back in archaeological times, again, for lack of a better term. It's been a long day, it's been a long week. It's quite tricky. So we might be able to spend the whole episode talking about how to differentiate sort of between these different species and domesticated varieties, but it'll probably just end up being incredibly generic.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, basically, at the end of the day, like, there are ways where if you gave us, you know, an assemblage of bones, you can kind of get an idea of, you know, are we looking at domesticate assemblage, or are we looking at a wild hunted assemblage? But there's also a problem where, like, in kind of like the Neolithic and later prehistory in Britain, we don't have as many assemblages that we could say, oh, these are like hunted animals in comparison to domesticates, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. I mean, they weren't necessarily hunting for all their sustenance at this point. You know, they were settling down, creating settlements and things like that. So they didn't have to hunt as much per se. I mean, obviously they did still hunt, but, you know.
Not as much, because that's the thing. Of course, there isn't as much research sort of on wild game in the post-Neolithic period, just because we don't have enough of an assemblage to go by more often than not. Although I guess, no, yeah. I don't guess. I'm not guessing anything. No.
No, but like
people that start to hunt less.
Yeah, I mean, like, that is kind of the rule of thumb. Like, I don't want to say that obviously people weren't hunting. They were definitely hunting, but it's clearly a smaller sample size that we get, at least archaeologically. And there's also the fact that it's a different context when you look at hunted animals versus domesticated animals. You know, if you're digging a settlement or something, you're going to find domesticates around the settlement, because, you know, that's where they live, that's where they were bred, that's where they died, stuff like that. But hunted animals, it gets kind of dicey, because technically in archaeology, we can separate it into like two different contexts. So you kind of have kill sites and you have processing sites.
Then I'm going to take it up a notch. What if, like, just in the case of like sort of some of the deer parks that you would have had from the Roman period, so what if the kill and the processing sites was the same?
The same, yeah.
Because it was animals that, yes, they are wild animals, but they would have been kept in an enclosure for people to, well, I guess, who had fun hunting things.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously with like all archaeological things get very liminal, and, you know, it's all the same thing, and nothing can be really easy for us, which is why our job is so hard sometimes.
But a t-shirt.
Yeah, our hardest so job. That's what I was about to say. Oh gosh. But just for the sake of people listening at home, we're just going to kind of, we'll go with the fact that usually there are kill sites and processing sites. Like Simona said, there are instances where they're one and the same, but, for the most part, they are usually separate. So when you have kill sites, those are the initial place of hunting. That's where the initial kill happens, hence the name kill sites, extremely appropriate. And so hunters will often kind of just take the stuff that they need. So if they take down, let's say, a deer, they might not necessarily take the whole deer back to the settlement, depending on, if you're that far away from your settlement, you aren't necessarily going to drag that all the way back.
Well, exactly. And that's especially true of earlier prehistory, where literally chances are you would have probably had to just grab the whole deer and carry it on your shoulder, or using, maybe some help. So like perhaps it wouldn't have been the most easy way of going about it. So it would probably call for portioning the carcass on site and then take what you think is necessary back to your settlement or processing site, I guess. So then where the animals would be further butchered for use. So you get you break it into your joints, and then you do your smaller portioning for cooking or for storing. And then I guess then you eat it and you chuck it in a pit.
Yeah, and those are usually middens, and that's where we find them on the kind of settlements. And then when you get to that kind of point, you're kind of differentiating based on, what species you can identify to be like, hey, these were definitely not like domesticated animals that were slaughtered for consumption. These were clearly hunted animals. And a lot of times when you are differentiating between these two kind of like contextual sites, you have to look at the elements. So unfortunately for me, my only real example is fish, which I guess technically counts as hunting. We count fishing as hunting, right?
I would say it's hunting.
Yeah, it's not like the most glamorous hunting, I would say. We here at Archaeoanimals are pro fishing as hunting. We stand in support of all those fisher people who are trying to.
People, oh dear.
Yeah, fisher people who do their fishing and want to be seen as serious hunters, but people say, "Oh, that's not really hunting." Well, I'm Alex Fitzpatrick is here to tell you that it is hunting, and you can jot that down. Thank you. That's the end of the podcast, right?
That might as well be.
Okay, I'm bringing it back. Don't worry, I'm bringing it back. Anyway, so what fishing, at least, there's clearly a kill site and a processing site. The kill site being where you actually go to fish. The processing site usually being like a place on the settlement. And so with Iron Age fishing up in the Scotland, especially in the Orkneys, what you get is if you find more like fish heads and things like that, it usually indicates that was a processing site, because you basically will be, you'd chop off the head, you'd have the rest of that, and that would be what you eat and things like that.
I was going to say, because with fish, there wouldn't be any need to portion the carcass at the kill site. It's a fish. How big can it be? Just take it back.
I think when it gets to like, not fish, but more like cephalopods, you can it kind of gets a little bit different.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're so freaking big. That seemed very obvious. I don't know why I decided to just let everyone know that whales are really big, so you wouldn't necessarily drag it all the way back.
Is there much evidence for cephalopod hunting in the Iron Age period?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. It definitely happened. And I know that you get bits of, not cephalopods, but in terms of marine mammals in general, you do get bits of seal on sites. But though they were probably used for oil anyway, because you get like millions of stone lamp artifacts up there, and that's one of the main ways you get oil, besides other fish, of course.
Because I guess seal as well would have quite an amount of fat, which I guess in return will be good to make oil.
Yeah, it's like Oil City up there. And that's also something that you can find when you're going hunting, because we should also point that out. Well, not just oil. I mean, yeah, oil. But like, when I feel like when we think of hunting, we immediately think of, food and things like that. But obviously they're using these animals for much, much more. Like we said, it can be something as simple as oil for lamps and for things like that. Or, clearly they would take things like antlers and work them into ornamentation, into things used for ritual, which is our favorite word, obviously.
I don't know where that came from. I do apologize.
So I'm just wondering, well, I'm sure it's just what goes on in your head, Simona. I'm just wondering, in addition to obviously the primary kill site and then a secondary processing site, do we have examples of where there's even tertiary and quaternary sites for processing? Or is it usually just primary and secondary? What do we usually see when it comes to processing animals? Do we normally just see two different sites, or is there evidence for like more sites? And what does that really tell us about the kind of behavior that, the way that people treated these kind of animals after hunting?
Tristan, you wild man.
I mean, I'm not sure about...
Why?
There's just tertiary sites.
Well, no, because in a way, like...
no, I mean, like, what if you can't process it? You know what I mean?
No, I mean,
I get it.
I don't have an example off the top of my head for game per se, and I'm not sure about any sort of inference it might give on behavior, but a thing that you might get just with your staple domesticates is that sometimes they will be, they're usually raised on a farm somewhere, and they may or may not be killed on that site or moved onto another site. When they then get killed, the carcass gets portioned, and some of that may go to the closest city, where there and over there, like, it gets portioned even more into sort of cooking portions. Ring a bell every time I say portion. And consumed and then disposed of. So I guess that, in a way, loosely, you might call that a tertiary site.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's also pretty difficult. Like, it's already kind of difficult enough to find kill sites, because you have to to like really confirm it, you have to have certain elements that you would know are not necessarily parts of the animal that hunters would be interested in.
Well, and especially I feel it would be difficult to find in the ground, because you're not going to leave any archaeological features behind. It's literally an event that happened in time.
Yeah.
That has not really left anything in terms of archaeological features, because they wouldn't have dug, I don't know, a rubbish pit. They wouldn't have done anything to alter the land. They would have literally just killed the animal, disposed of the bone, but they don't sit within a secure archaeological context, if that makes sense. So it's just something like, how do you look for it? It's almost like you'd have to dig almost haphazardly to go and find it.
Good job, Tristan. You asked us a very difficult question.
No, this is more of a comment than a question. I'm just kidding.
This is more of a fist than a friendly gesture in your face. I can't even make good insults. That's how tired I am. But now that you've hurt me and Simona's brains with that question, I think we need to take a break and lay down for a second.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ANIMALS.
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
And we're back. And we're talking about hunting, which is yet another topic that is going to make me hungry for this entire conversation.
You really need to start having dinner before you record.
I know. I know. It's just so bad, especially with what we're going to talk about next, which is like...
This is the chicken episode all over again.
It's any episode, to be honest. I'm gonna tell you something real dark, guys. Okay, I worked on human bones once, and I was looking at the ribs and thinking about how they looked very similar to like deer ribs, and got really hungry.
Okay, this is the last episode of Archaeoanimals, is it?
I'm speaking my truth out, okay? I had a moment of weakness where I was really hungry, and any bone that I saw, regardless of what species it was, I was going to be like, that would probably be delicious.
Just please don't eat the archaeology.
Anyway.
Butchery!
Yeah, so this is like my personal thing. I don't know if you necessarily agree, Simona, but I would say when it comes to hunting, there's two like main things to look out for, and one of them's butchery and the other one's pathology. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so if we want to kind of like break it down, I'm sure we'll also do very long drawn out episodes about these in more detail.
Well, because the thing with butcheries, of course, because as we've discussed, we have usually a kill site and a processing site, which will both display butchery, by the way. But of course, on your kill site, because you will find butchery mark of the bits of carcass that's been left behind, you know, in order to detach it from the bits that you're taking. And in a way, why butchery and also like the elements that are recovered are important is because that can give us some inference of whether we're looking at a kill site or a processing site. Now, of course, bear in mind that the theories that have been developed make a lot of assumptions.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is going to be something. When we do our butchery episode, we will have a whole thing about it.
But at the same time, it's that or nothing.
Exactly.
So it's good to at least have something to go by, and then you can try and remove the bias as much as you can.
Yeah.
So the researchers done what you have Theodore White does some research on the subject, sort of what gets taken and what gets left behind at kill sites. And later Binford.
My boy Binford.
So theorized sort of what he thought, like he did some ethnological work as well. To sort of to have something, to have a baseline to compare it to, and sort of he devised sort of a system so to look at what you'd think would be transported back to the processing side. So like here we're looking at meat joints that have a greater food value or more marrow or fat or, you know, skins, things that, you know, not just for the meat, as you said, but also to, you know, get other products out of it. Based on that, the things that you normally would want to take back with you, like you'll take back the skin, and that would also result in the foot bones traveling with the hide, because that usually gets left with the hide when you remove it.
Yeah.
You'll have the rib cage and your upper limb bones, which will leave the skull, the vertebrae, and the lower value, like lower limb bones left at the kill site. So this is what is called a general utility index. So thanks to that, you can actually assess the value of each bone. So yeah, we're still looking at this meat, marrow, and fat ratio to see whether you're looking at a kill site or a processing site. But now, about the assumptions that, of course, this is very variable. It's not set in stone that if you go hunt a deer in the Iron Age, you're going to leave the head and the lower limb bones and the vertebrae there and take everything else. Because it depends, what are you hunting them for? What do you actually need from the animal? Or are you experiencing a period of famine where, like, literally you got to eat everything you get? But also, if you want to get more into the cultural aspect of it, you know, we're looking at cultures that more often than not, if you're looking at prehistory, that have left us no written record. So did they have a particular perception of a certain animal? Would they bring, even if the skull has got no or very little meat utility value, would they bring it back for any sort of cultural or purpose? Or maybe they really liked brain. Not sure if you see where I'm coming from. So like the perception they would have had of what is a delicacy or if something is a taboo. So they leave something behind that maybe is got a high utility value in terms of meat, but that culture would have left it behind because it's taboo for them to eat it. Is that there's a lot of things that we just won't know.
It's it's definitely a bit more complex than I think previous archaeologists have kind of made it out to be. And it's something that personally I'm really wary about. Like if I'm reading a site report or something and they start getting more into, they were clearly, doing so-and-so and, using this for marrow specifically to eat and whatever, like you really got to take it with a grain of salt. Get it? Because food. And and also it's a lot of maths. It's a lot of maths. And I don't know how zooarchs do that.
With plenty of coffee and the right attitude.
Yeah, I mean, then you can get into the calorie thing. Have you seen archaeologists do that? I feel like it used to be really popular and it's getting less so now, but people would figure out the calories that people would be getting from their meals based on the remains of food and stuff.
I'm not sure that much thought went into hunting an animal.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean
you can see it from a broader sense. It's like, I'm not going to hunt this species because it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
For the amount of meat I'm going to get in return. But maybe not as mathematical, if that makes sense. It's like, I could hunt that animal. I mean, it's going to feed me for some time, but not even that much time. And, it's a really angry animal. I'm probably going to leave it be.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure folks in the Iron Age were taking scraps of paper and writing down formulas to be if we do this and this, we'll probably be okay calorie-wise. Yeah, no offense to zooarchs and archaeologists who like doing that. That's cool, and we're proud of you. But also, I'm scared of numbers, and I don't like math.
Well, but as we said earlier, a lot of these systems, they come with biases, and there is a degree of assumption. But as we said, it's still something better to go by than just sit and speculate. It might be because of that period.
Yeah, of course.
So it's good that they're there.
Yeah, definitely. We can make fun of it, and we will make fun of it, and we have made fun of it. But, it's just kind of that, branching out your imagination to kind of hold all these different variables in your mind. So, nobody's perfect, as they say. So moving away from that, and again, I feel like we're going to probably end up doing an episode just on butchery and cooking and stuff, which will really make me hungry. Cleavers! The other thing that I think is pretty key when it comes to hunting is pathology, specifically, not necessarily disease pathology, but more of the, trauma. Because if you find an animal that's got some pretty bad blunt trauma to the head, you could probably speculate that maybe it was hunted or specifically killed. Starting out there.
Yeah, but then again, you might see that with domesticates as well, because one thing that you see a lot in the guest friend, the Roman period, is that cattle would often just get a handy pole axe to the head. So if you see a nice little circular hole at the top of the skull, that pole axe.
I wonder if it was a specifically Iron Age thing in general, because we find that in Iron Age Scotland sites as well, pole-axed cattle skulls and stuff.
Well, I guess it's I don't know. I've never dispatched a cow, so I can't possibly comment.
Get off the podcast. We are only let people who've only let people who have dispatched cows on this podcast.
Sorry, what is a pole axe? I'm not very familiar with Roman weaponry.
We have them to this day, I'm pretty sure. It's an axe with the pointy end.
Don't tell me we have them nowadays.
Well, they don't...
is that like a pickaxe?
Pretty much.
Yeah, kind of. It's like kind of hard to explain. I just realized because I think I've only seen a poleaxe once.
So they're not that common. So I'm not that
I mean,
like kind of out of it.
I've Googled poleaxe. Now, in retrospect, it might be slightly the wrong term because what I'm seeing here, like of the very ornate medieval poleaxes, it's really not what I had in mind. Because I'm seeing a lot of photos of heraldry with the axe on one side and sort of the pointy bit on the other. It looked a bit too ornate, but a version of the poleaxe. So I guess not unlike a pickaxe.
Yeah. I mean, in our defense, I feel like we mostly deal with the aftermath of being poleaxed, not necessarily the actual item of the poleaxe. I can tell you what, like, a poleaxe skull looks like. I've seen plenty of them.
What does that look like? You know, what is the shape? How do you tell?
Just kind of like an almost not perfect, but it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, that's definitely not like a natural occurring like thing.
It's a very circular. It's a very circular hole.
Like it is just it is a circular hole. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, the reason why I say that you can tell it wasn't an accident is because obviously, especially with zooarchaeology, we get bones that are fragmented just from, being tossed around by nature, by people walking over it, stuff like that. So, we see like cracked and broken bones all the time. But like things like trauma like this is very specifically like circular and like, it's again another thing that's hard to explain. I think in our cow episode we might have put or one of our domesticate episodes we put a picture of a poleaxe cattle skull that I have in my lab, but if not we will also add it to the show notes here so you can all see the majesty of a poleaxe cow.
The joys.
I'm fun.
But moving on from poleaxes, pickaxes, and various axe friends, another thing that you can sometimes, if you're really, really, really lucky, find is weapons actually embedded in the skeletal remains. I think there was an interesting photo going around the internet some time ago. I think it wasn't archaeological per se. I think it was sort of a relatively modern, say like a 200-year-old specimen of that deer bone that had an arrow stuck to it.
Oh yeah, that was. Oh, I get really jealous when I see stuff like that because I want to find stuff like that, but I never find stuff like that. Life is unfair.
So you can sometimes find the weapon embedded in the skeletal remains, but you find that there's been some cases of human remains that arrowheads stuck to them, so we're like, well, we know what happened there.
No, it was on purpose.
I'm just wondering, how do you distinguish like the order in which this damage has occurred? Because I could easily see somebody, you've talked already about like almost cutting up a part of a large animal, transporting to a processing site, and then it goes to another village where it's further broken down. How do we determine the different stages of these kind of butcheries and how these deaths happen? So what kind of differentiates that kind of stuff? Do post-mortem and pre-mortem kind of injuries, how do they differ in the bone, or are they pretty much the same?
Pre-mortem, depending on how pre it is, will be distinguishable because the bone will start healing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant like the killing blow versus the butchery blow.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, it's like if you're chopping a femur in half, that's probably not what killed the cow.
Just a really opportune swing. That would be horrible. Gosh, I'm sorry I laughed at that. But yeah, no.
It's like sometimes you can.
Oh, I mean, I was gonna say a lot of it kind of is logistics of just like if you get, let's say you find a hole, if you're lucky enough to find most of a domesticate or like a deer or something, and you could see that there was clearly some trauma in the skull that broke through, but you can also see that there are butchery marks. I mean, like you can kind of get a feel for it. Well, they probably knocked it down, hit it in the head, something like that to kill it. And then they started butchering it. You know what I mean? Like a lot of it kind of has to be an assumption, which is unfortunate, of course, but just how it
I
works.
guess yes and no, because I guess, I don't know, if you're shooting a deer, say, with a bow and arrow, then you'll find trauma on whenever the arrow hit. If it did strike any bone, because chances are it may have not.
Oh, sure, yeah, of course.
It may have just struck an internal organ, the animal has died. But then the trauma resulting from that, or like something piercing the bone, or the poleaxe to the head, or any sort of blunt force trauma, will be different from the butchering. Because in butchering, I think, like we discussed it a couple of episodes ago, you'd have things, you know, like chop marks where the bone is quite evidently been either chopped or sawn, say, in half, or you'll have I don't know what are called sort of slicing marks that either, you know, to remove the hide or to remove every sort of last bit of meat off the bone, and you have like a series of very tiny cuts on the bone that are going to look quite different to the kind of trauma that you'd have if you've shot a deer. We keep talking about deer, but probably the easiest example, and to be fair, like out of sort of game in terms of mammals, I think deer is one of the most frequently occurring in the archaeological record compared to, say, I don't know, like wild boar. But then again, some of that might be like, if you find fragmented remains, is it pig or is it wild boar?
Oh, don't even get started with that. We already did an episode on pigs.
get your caliper ready.
But yeah. Oh, gosh. But yeah, no, I mean, again, we should also kind of just point out that we are speaking from as two people who mostly work in Britain. So obviously, if we were in other parts of the world, we would be talking about different species that would be, you know, more prevalent as game.
Absolutely. The same goes with sort of hunting declining from the Neolithic period, because we're talking about some very specific cultures that were confined to the British Isles, because the situation is very different elsewhere.
And to continue our Eurocentric perspective on this topic, we're going to take a break and we'll be talking about case studies from Britain right after this. Woo! Woo!
Back to school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Can I ask in this last section before your case studies, can I just have like a tiny little comment question in? So what I find quite interesting is that the projectiles and things that are found within animals is actually a source of controversy in the US. I know that obviously the whole Clovis theory, and actually some of the more pseudoscientific theories like the Solutrean boats theory coming from where basically because they find these certain fragments of arrows in bones of larger animals in America. They basically said, well, they must have come from Spain because nobody at that time in America could make their own technology like that, which is honestly
a very interesting assumption. I
feel like it says a lot more about the person making the assumption than the actual pseudo archaeological trash that they're saying.
I'm not familiar with any of those theories, and I feel quite blessed.
Must be nice.
Yeah, that's quite nice. All I want to say is that, as opposed to other pseudo-archaeological and pseudo-scientific kind of ideas, I think there's something very interesting in how people kind of look at these things almost like a crime scene, and it's almost rooted in a bit more reality, which I'm hoping that you guys can kind of go into further depths to what we do find when we find animals that have been butchered, and why perhaps that gives us far more information than just where people came from. It actually gives us information about how they kind of lived and stuff. So I'll leave you with that point.
Thanks for reminding me about American Stonehenge indirectly through that.
There's only one Stonehenge.
No, yeah, there is only one, and it's called Carhenge, and it exists in America, and it's made entirely out of Chevrolets.
What?
Oh, Simona, that's going to have to be in the show notes.
We'll take this discussion off mic.
I've got no idea what you're talking
Case
about.
studies.
Anymore.
Let's do case studies that are not Carhenge, even though I could talk about Carhenge for days, and that's probably a new podcast. Alex talks about different
That's right. You can do that. I might just drop my headphones and very silently sneak out and I guess go harvest some kale.
Don't hate on the things that I like, which include fake henges.
I'm not hating on them. I'm just ignoring them.
Fair enough. But so the case studies that we're talking about today, again, are specifically, British. So apologies for that. But again, as we've mentioned many, many times, we are two people who specifically work in Britain, and this is our specialty. So you'll have to bear with us. Get it? Bear? Like the animal?
Which we've not mentioned even once.
No.
The entire podcast.
Sorry. Well, I'm just mad because I never get to find bear bones. That would have been cool.
Oh,
I thought you deal with bare bones all the time. They don't have the meat on them.
Hold on, I'm calling the cops.
So the case studies. Come on,
yes.
Let's keep going.
So our case study for this episode is the Fallow Deer Project, which is one of those really big projects that are going on right now here in the UK that are looking at kind of how fallow deer have existed through time here in Britain. Simona, do you want to talk a bit about that? Or?
Yeah, because an interesting thing about, fallow deer, because we see fallow deer all the time. I mean, it's very widely spread as a species across the UK, usually in many sort of stately homes and historic houses that you can go visit. But what many people may not know is that the European fallow deer that is in Britain today has been introduced and is not actually native to the country. Now, if you really want to push it, sort of wind it way, way, way back to the end of to the Ice Age, fallow deer was on the British Isles. It then went extinct at the end of the last Ice Age. So for quite a few thousand years, we've had no fallow deer in Britain whatsoever. And it has thus been, at some point in time, been introduced. So one of the things that the project has been looking at is when exactly has the fallow deer been introduced. Because now we have evidence of the species in the Roman period. I think one of the most notable examples is Fishbourne Palace, which is a Roman site where they have fallow deer. And the Romans did indeed introduce fallow deer, mostly because they, much I guess like the Normans and later on in the medieval period, the upper classes would have these hunting estates located next to their villas where they would go and hunt deer. So for the most part, they've been introduced and kept in these deer parks for people to hunt. But then you start seeing less of the fallow deer until the numbers, so they drop entirely and then they go up again after the Norman conquest. So what has been ruled that has likely happened is that, yes, the Romans were the first to introduce fallow deer to Britain. However, the population that is here in Britain today is not linked to the one introduced by the Romans. So I guess the Romans have packed their bags and left the Isles, I guess the fallow deer sort of went with them one way or another. And it was actually the Normans that then brought them back for their own deer hunting parks. And it's from those populations that we have the fallow deer that are in the country today.
And there you have it. So I feel like a lot of people don't actually don't know the whole fallow deer story. So I'm glad we can talk about it on here because it is really interesting. And I think it's just something you wouldn't necessarily even think about because deer in general are so prolific in places like here.
Well, they are they're not invasive species, but they are routinely culled.
Yeah.
Because the issue that we have now, that of course wouldn't have been the case in the Roman period, well, also because they were kept in parks, but if you glance over that, it's just that, of course, over sort of in antiquity and during the medieval period, many of the native predators have gone extinct.
Yeah.
Usually, 9 times out of 10, our fault. We can agree on that. So, of course, now we have a numerous species of deer, not all of which are native to Britain. There's a few more that I might mention just because I find them really interesting animals to look at. You're finding all this deer that just keep, breeding, because there's no predators to have any control on the species whatsoever.
Yeah.
So in a way, we do have too many deer because, of course, all the wolves are gone and all the bears are gone. The lynx are gone.
Yeah, and then that puts in the component of hunting as something that is kind of necessary in that case. And even though we didn't necessarily domesticate these deer, it's another example of the kind of human interference and how we ultimately create this role in a way in maintaining these populations.
In a way, I guess, some good can come out of that because I guess the sale of venison products is actually on the rise from, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone that's listening, correct me if I'm wrong. I think more wild game is being bought in this country. So in recent years, it provides an alternative almost for those who do eat meat. It provides an alternative to sort of more intensive farming, or if you think of sort of environmental concerns over methane gas emissions and all that. So it does provide an alternative to that. So I guess it's not going to waste.
Yeah.
The ones
and I want to point out that I had a venison burger this past week and it was delicious. There you go. And I think also, kind of to go back a little bit, one thing I really like about this case study is that it also introduces this kind of thing where hunting goes from being something that's necessary to being kind of necessary to more of a sport, which is what it more or less is now, at least for a majority of people,
I guess it depends which part of the world you're in.
Yeah, of course. But speaking about Britain, at least, you can see that kind of change in trends.
Yeah, I guess you have a combination of both because you do have, as is the case for deer, a certain degree of just population control.
Yeah.
And then you use from the population control, you get other products and things out of it. Including, if you're really, really keen on it, you could carve yourself a headdress out of a deer skull and go on a bit of a Star Car enactment.
Yay, Star Car. I love Star Car. So our next, if you can't tell, our next case study is Star Car, which I'm pretty sure we've talked about on this podcast. I love Star Car, so I can't see why we wouldn't have.
Shame on us if we haven't.
Yeah. Star Car, mostly, I think, famous for those amazing deer headdresses, which you just mentioned.
Oh, yeah. How about you tell us a bit more about Star Car?
Harsh, but fair. So Star Car is a site that's located in Yorkshire, and it's a Mesolithic settlement. And like we said, its main claim to fame are these really amazing headdresses that were made from the kind of the cranial vaults of the deer. I think is it mostly red deer? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think there's some roe as well.
Yeah, it's something that's very interesting to me, of course, because PhD stuff. But they're just fantastically preserved. And so if you look up Starcar, that's like the first thing that comes up. But the other thing is that, because it is a settlement site, we also have loads of evidence for their hunting trends and how they approached hunting, seasonality, and things like that. So like you said, we have roe deer. I think we also have red deer. We have wild oxen, elk, wild boar. It was basically a smorgasbord of wild game.
But now by elk, is it meant red deer or alches? I'm gonna go with elk.
Yeah. No.
Oh, what's alches is moose.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
It's moose.
So what? Quick clarification. So for any American listeners, what we think of as moose, people in this country refer to as elk, and it's really annoying, and I hate it. But yeah.
And don't you refer to like elk as like red deer would be elk?
It's very confusing, and it hurts my brain. And now everyone listening knows the struggles of being an American zooarchaeologist who works primarily in the United Kingdom. But anyway, Starcar has elk and deer, and we have loads of remains like deer antler. And from that, we're actually able to find out about things of seasonality of their camp. So like, when would they actually hunt these animals? Because obviously antlers have a bit of a seasonal cycle. They eventually shed at some point during the year and then regrow. So if we are finding these antlers, specifically like, fully grown antlers, things like that, we can kind of get an idea of when they were probably hunted.
Yeah, and I guess the same applies for like all the other species recovered from site, because if we look sort of at the natural birth cycles, presuming that they were the same back then as they are today.
Again, assumption.
Go without saying. But by looking at the age of death, so looking at all your profiles, you could then potentially pinpoint at what time of the year those animals were killed, thus giving you a rough date combined with the antler for when the camp was actually occupied. Because, of course, it would have been, pre-Neolithic period, people would not have been stationary at the one camp. I don't know, some might have been, and we just haven't found out about it yet. So you'll have camps, and normally in a lot of cultures you find usually two different sites. So you'll have a winter camp and a summer camp. Mm-hmm. So what they think they've got at Starcar would be, I guess, loosely a summer camp. Because I guess the dates were like the records, the age of death profiles were looking at sort of March to October sort of. So yeah, summer occupation.
Probably a good estimate. There would be more of a summer camp. But yeah, no, I think that's an element from hunting that we sometimes forget, or at least I forget for sure. Because we're always looking at, why were they hunted? How are they hunted? But there's also the when as well. And that it would be extremely important to have this kind of information in terms of, when was the best season to be hunting these animals? Where would they be even located? Because obviously a lot of migrations will occur at these times. So Starcar, I think, is a fantastic example of kind of how we're actually able to extrapolate that kind of information from remains.
Absolutely. And I think that in the past, recent...
And can I use the terrible...
No, I was just going to say that...
Can I please use I want to use the word.
No, all I was going to say is that the team that has worked on Starcar, they've recently had two big publications. So I guess it's one big publication divided into two volumes that has come out recently. So go check that out because it's really cool.
Yeah, it's also available online through White Rose Publishing.
That's the one.
So you can just... Yep, so it's open access. You can go read it. It's really great, and there's some amazing images in there as well. All right, Tristan, what is this horrible thing you're going to say?
The R word, ritual. So I was wondering, right, you're talking about processing at Starcar, your death profiles and your kind of seasonal things. Do we have any evidence of kind of ritual behavior here? And is there a point where we can divide up butchery from ritual behavior. I'm guessing it's quite a fine line, isn't it?
It kind of gets that point of, can you even separate ritual from quote unquote non-ritual? Because to a lot of people, things that we would say, oh, those are ritual, are just things that they do that are part of their everyday life. So they wouldn't necessarily see it as like, oh, this is a ritual thing I'm doing. You know what I mean? And with Starkar, with the headdresses especially, it kind of goes into this overall theory in terms of deer headdresses in archaeology, in that most people think that there's a bit of a religious type of connotation where someone who's like, I don't want to say shaman, because I don't necessarily love using that term for a broad amount of religious significance and stuff like that. But someone who's in charge of the kind of rituals and things like that would dress in a headdress, and kind of it would be a sort of like transformation that they would do, perhaps, while doing in a trance or, something like that. And the other thing is that there's also this idea that hunters may have worn headdresses to become the animal to help them hunt and things like that, which I guess those are both very similar. They're just from different. And
of course, there's also the old age argument of I've carved it like that because it looks cool.
Yeah, which I like to believe is everything that we ever find in archaeology. Just papers and papers of just, they clearly did this because it represents the blah, blah, blah. And
he was like, no, it looked cool.
Oh, man, that looks awesome. Look what hey, Brad, look what I made. Look at this. This is so cool. So, yeah, no, I guess maybe like ritual, hunting is very much, who can say? I guess that's the main theme of this episode, is that ultimately you are running on a lot of assumptions. And we have to utilize things like, how we approach hunting in modern day, ethnographies, things like that. But yeah, ultimately, even if some of it is based on assumption, there's a wealth of information you can get out of it.
Just all popped in there. So as per episode title, it's a bit of a hunter's hot pot.
Yes. That reminds me, I'm very hungry. So we'll wrap up this episode before I literally die of starvation. As always, you can find us on Twitter. We have the ArchaeoAnimals Twitter, and we also have a Facebook page. We're obviously online at the Archaeology Podcast Network website. So feel free to tweet us, ask us questions, tell me that I'm wrong about most things, which is fine. You're just like my supervisors. I was also just recently on a different podcast. I was on the Arc and Anth podcast, hosted by a colleague and friend of the show, Michael Rivera? Michael is going to yell at me about this. I'm really bad with last names, but you can check out that podcast as well and hear me just talk about archaeology and yell for like a solid hour, just like this podcast. Anything else you have to add, Simona, before we leave and I go get a takeaway?
Please get some food.
Thank you. Listeners, if you'd like to send me food, here's my address. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to send you my address, but please DM me if you want to just send me random food. If you're not sketchy, I'll probably give you my address because I love food. It's great.
We should have, that Weatherspoons app.
Oh,
yeah. Where you can kind of order it to a table in a certain place. So,
I'm going to get a PO box so people can send me food.
Open up a Weatherspoons.
All right. No, seriously, we got to end this episode before I die. I'm so hungry. But yeah, as always, it's Alex Fitzpatrick and
Simona Falanga.
And this has been ArchaeoAnimals. I'm going to eat so much food. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Archaeoanimals. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. You can find us on Twitter at Archaeoanimals. Also, the views expressed on the podcast are those of ourselves, the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily represent those of our institution, employers, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.